Arrogant billionaire refuses to stand for black judge. What she does next shocked the courtroom. The federal courthouse in Manhattan stood like a modern-day fortress of justice, its imposing limestone facade gleaming in the April sunshine inside Courtroom 24B. The atmosphere crackled with tension as spectators, reporters, and legal teams filled every available seat. This was day one of United States v. Cole Enterprises, one of the most anticipated corporate fraud trials in recent memory. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the bailiff's voice rang out with practiced authority. All rise. The United States District Court for the Southern District of New York is now in session, the Honorable Judge Maya Carter presiding. The entire courtroom rose to its feet, with one notable exception. Brandon Cole, founder and CEO of Cole Enterprises, remained defiantly seated at the defense table, scrolling through his phone with studied nonchalance. At 53, Cole cut an impressive figure even while seated. His custom-tailored Navy suit, precisely trimmed salt and pepper hair, and the casual confidence of a man worth an estimated $17 billion radiated the power he was accustomed to wielding in boardrooms and luxury resorts around the world. His lead attorney, Richard Hargrove of the prestigious firm Hargrove, Mitchell & West, leaned over and whispered urgently, "Brandon, stand up now." Cole didn't even look up from his phone. "I don't stand for anyone, Richard. You know that." Judge Maya Carter entered the courtroom with measured steps, her black robe flowing around her as she took her place at the bench. At 46, she was relatively young for a federal judge appointed just 3 years earlier. After a distinguished career as a prosecutor, she had made history as the first black woman to serve on the federal bench in the Southern District, a fact that had garnered both celebration and, in certain circles, resentment. Her keen eyes scanned the courtroom, immediately noticing the seated billionaire. If she was surprised or offended, her expression revealed nothing as she calmly placed her materials on the bench and adjusted her microphone. "You may be seated," she instructed the courtroom at large. As the rustle of movement subsided, she fixed her gaze directly on Brandon Cole. "Mr. Cole, in my courtroom, all participants stand when the court is called to order. It's a sign of respect for the judicial system, not for me personally." Cole finally looked up from his phone, his expression one of mild annoyance rather than contrition. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I'm a busy man running a global enterprise. I believe my attorneys can handle the formalities while I focus on matters requiring my direct attention." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Carter's expression remained impassive, though those familiar with her might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes, the only visible sign of her reaction to Cole's brazen disrespect. "Mr. Cole," she replied, her voice measured but firm. "In this courtroom, your primary business is this case. The rules apply equally to all participants, regardless of their wealth or status outside these walls. I'll ask you once more to stand when court is called to order." Cole leaned back in his chair, a small dismissive smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He slipped his phone into his jacket pocket, but made no move to stand. "I meant no disrespect, Your Honor, but I don't see the relevance of these theatrical formalities to the legal matters at hand." Judge Carter studied him for a moment, then turned to the bailiff. "The defendant is held in contempt of court. Please escort Mr. Cole to holding until he's prepared to comply with basic courtroom protocol." The pronouncement sent another wave of whispers through the gallery. Several reporters slipped out to file breaking updates. Brandon Cole's expression transformed from smug confidence to stunned disbelief as two U.S. Marshals approached the defense table. "This is outrageous," he protested, finally rising to his feet, though not out of respect. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yes, Mr. Cole, I'm fully aware of who you are," Judge Carter replied, her voice steady. "In this courtroom, you are a defendant in a federal case, nothing more and nothing less. When you're ready to participate appropriately, we'll proceed." As the marshals escorted a visibly fuming Cole from the courtroom, his attorney approached the bench. "Your Honor, I apologize for my client's behavior. If I could have a brief recess to speak with him, counsel will reconvene at 11:00 a.m., Judge Carter said. Cutting off the request, "I suggest you use that time to explain to your client that his wealth and influence end at the doors of this courtroom." The case against Brandon Cole was substantial. The federal indictment alleged a complex scheme of securities, fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice, spanning nearly a decade. Prosecutors claimed that Cole had systematically misrepresented his company's financial position to investors, while using a network of shell companies to hide assets and evade hundreds of millions in taxes. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 30 years in prison, a virtual life sentence for the middle-aged billionaire. Outside the courtroom, media outlets were already framing the contempt order along predictable partisan lines. Conservative commentators decried it as judicial overreach and questioned whether Judge Carter's actions stemmed from reverse racism or class warfare. Progressive outlets highlighted Cole's history of problematic statements about women and minorities in leadership positions, suggesting his behavior reflected deeper biases. Neither narrative captured the simple truth witnessed by those in the courtroom. A man who believed himself above the law had encountered a judge unwilling to bend the rules regardless of wealth or status. At 11:00 a.m., Sharp Court reconvened. This time, when the bailiff called the room to order, Brandon Cole stood with the rest of the attendees, though the tight set of his jaw and the cold fury in his eyes made it clear the compliance was grudging at best. "Thank you for joining us, Mr. Cole," Judge Carter said evenly, neither gloating nor acknowledging the earlier confrontation beyond this simple statement. "Now, let's proceed with the arraignment." As the formal reading of charges began, Cole leaned over to his attorney and whispered something that made Hargrove's expression tighten with concern. Whatever strategy the billionaire was contemplating, it was clear that the morning's humiliation had only hardened his resolve. The battle lines were drawn not just between prosecution and defense, but between a man unaccustomed to accountability and a judge determined to provide exactly that. The next morning, Brandon Cole arrived at the courthouse surrounded by an expanded security detail. 4 suited men with earpieces and watchful eyes who formed a human barrier between the billionaire and the press corps, shouting questions about his contempt charge. Gone was the casual arrogance of the previous day, replaced by a calculated performance of dignified persecution. He had spent the night not in the penthouse suite that occupied the top 3 floors of the Cole Tower, but in a holding cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, a stark, concrete box, a world away from his usual accommodations. Judge Carter had released him late yesterday afternoon, only after he had given his word to abide by courtroom protocol going forward. The experience had transformed his attitude toward the trial from irritated inconvenience to personal vendetta. Inside the courtroom, Richard Hargrove was engaged in intense preparation, knowing that the day's proceedings would set the tone for the entire trial. As Cole approached the defense table, the attorney rose to meet him, concern evident in his expression. "Brandon, we need to discuss the strategy I outlined last night." Hargrove began, keeping his voice low. "The prosecution has substantial documentary evidence. Our best approach is to, I want her removed from this case." Cole interrupted, his voice a controlled but forceful whisper. "File whatever motions you need to file. Claim bias, prejudice, whatever works. Just get me a different judge." Hargrove's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "That's not a viable strategy. Judge Carter's reputation for fairness is well established. Nothing in her conduct suggests bias against you specifically." "She had me thrown in jail for sitting down," Cole hissed. "She had you held in contempt for deliberately disregarding basic courtroom protocol after being directly instructed to comply." Hargrove corrected, "Any judge would have done the same. Attacking her will only damage our position with the jury." Cole's eyes narrowed. "I've replaced lawyers before, Richard." Before Hargrove could respond to the thinly veiled threat, the bailiff's call for attention rang out. This time, Cole rose immediately. With the rest of the courtroom, his movement almost exaggerated in its promptness. The look he directed at Judge Carter, as she took the bench, however, contained nothing but cold hostility. The day's proceedings focused on preliminary motions and jury selection. The prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Elena Vega, presented a formidable opposition. At 38, Vega had already built a reputation for successfully prosecuting complex financial crimes. Her methodical questioning of potential jurors revealed a strategic mind focused on finding individuals who could understand the intricate financial mechanisms at the heart of the case. Throughout the morning, Judge Carter maintained precise control of her courtroom. Her rulings on procedural questions were prompt and clearly explained, with no apparent favoritism toward either side. To objective observers, she was conducting herself with textbook judicial professionalism. During the lunch recess, Cole's private PR team was busy implementing Phase 1 of their crisis management strategy. Carefully curated narratives began appearing on social media and friendly news outlets, questioning Judge Carter's qualifications and impartiality. None directly mentioned her race or gender, but the subtext was clear in the constant references to affirmative action appointments and questions about whether she was in over her head with such a complex financial case. By the time court reconvened for the afternoon session, these talking points had already begun circulating widely. Judge Carter, who maintained a strict personal policy of avoiding media coverage of her cases, remained unaware of the coordinated campaign unfolding outside her courtroom. The afternoon brought the first major clash over evidence. Prosecutor Vega sought to introduce emails from Cole to his CFO, discussing what she characterized as deliberate accounting manipulations designed to inflate quarterly earnings reports. Your Honor, these communications fall squarely within the business records exception to hearsay. Vega argued they represent contemporaneous discussions of business operations between corporate officers. Richard Hargrove rose to object. Your Honor, these cherry-picked excerpts distort casual brainstorming sessions into something sinister. Without the full context of these discussions, they're more prejudicial than probative. Judge Carter, considered both arguments carefully. I'll review the complete email chains and chambers. If they provide necessary context that materially changes the meaning of the excerpts the prosecution wishes to introduce, I'll sustain the objection. Otherwise, they'll be admitted. We'll address this first thing tomorrow morning." As she gavelled the court into recess for the day, Cole leaned toward Hargrove. "See what just happened? She's giving herself the ability to review evidence in private where she can interpret it however she wants. This is exactly what I was talking about." "That's standard procedure, Brandon." Hargrove replied, frustration evident in his tone. "She's doing her job properly." "We'll see about that," Cole muttered, rising from his seat with deliberate slowness, a calculated display that stopped just short of contempt while communicating his disdain. Outside the courthouse, Cole paused at the top of the steps to deliver an impromptu statement to the waiting press corps. With the grand courthouse columns behind him and his security detail flanking him, he cut an impressive figure, the embattled titan standing against the system. "While I have great respect for our judicial processes," he began, his voice modulated to project both strength and measured concern, "I am deeply troubled by what appears to be a predetermined attitude toward my case. Every American deserves a fair and impartial hearing. I'm not certain that's what's happening here." A reporter called out, "Are you suggesting Judge Carter is biased against you?" Cole's response was carefully calibrated. "I would never presume to question Judge Carter's intentions. I'm simply observing that the handling of my case thus far has been unusual in ways that concern my legal team. We're exploring all appropriate avenues to ensure a fair trial." With that, he stepped into his waiting SUV, having planted the seed he wanted without making specific allegations that could trigger judicial sanctions. What Cole couldn't see was Assistant U.S. Attorney Vega, standing in the shadows of the courthouse entrance, recording his statement on her phone with a slight smile. The billionaire had just handed her valuable ammunition, evidence of an attempt to influence public perception and potentially the jury pool, in direct contradiction to the judge's instructions against making public statements about the case. The battle was escalating, moving beyond the courtroom into the court of public opinion. But unlike the business world, where Cole's wealth often ensured he controlled the narrative, this arena had different rules and players he couldn't simply overpower or buy off. Judge Maya Carter represented something he had rarely encountered in his privileged life: authority. He could neither charm nor intimidate into submission. By the second week of trial, the prosecution had presented a methodical case, establishing the basic elements of their allegations. Financial experts had walked the jury through complex transactions designed to hide assets offshore. Former Cole Enterprises employees had testified about a corporate culture that prioritized appearance over substance, where questioning aggressive accounting practices was career suicide. Throughout these proceedings, Brandon Cole had maintained perfect courtroom decorum, standing promptly when required, addressing the judge as "Your Honor," and generally playing the role of the respectful defendant outside the courtroom. However, his PR machine had shifted into overdrive. A coordinated social media campaign had emerged questioning Judge Carter's qualifications, with particular emphasis on her lack of private sector experience before joining the bench. Cable news segments featured legal experts speculating about whether the complex financial matters in the case were beyond her expertise. A profile in a major business magazine documented her rapid rise to the federal bench, with unsubtle insinuations about diversity initiatives influencing her appointment. None of these attacks explicitly mentioned her race or gender, but the subtext was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Judge Carter remained focused solely on the proceedings before her, neither acknowledging the outside noise nor altering her careful by-the-book management of the case. Her evidentiary rulings continued to fall on both sides, sometimes favoring the prosecution, sometimes the defense based on her reading of the applicable law rather than any apparent bias. On Monday of the third week, the prosecution called their star witness, Frank Mercer, former CFO of Cole Enterprises, who had agreed to testify in exchange for leniency in his own case. As Mercer took the stand, tension in the courtroom intensified. Cole, who had maintained an almost theatrical display of bored confidence throughout most of the trial, suddenly sat forward, his eyes fixed on his former executive with cold intensity. Under Elena Vega's careful questioning, Mercer described direct conversations with Cole about creating shell companies to hide assets and manipulate tax liabilities. He presented contemporaneous notes from meetings where Cole had allegedly instructed him to make the numbers work, regardless of actual performance. Mr. Mercer, did Mr. Cole ever express concern about the legality of these accounting practices? Vega asked. Mercer's response was damning. Yes. Once when I raised concerns about potential SEC scrutiny, he told me, the SEC is staffed by bureaucrats making government salaries. We can run circles around them, and if anyone gets too close, there's always a consulting job waiting for them when they leave public service. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Carter called for order, then nodded to Richard Hargrove, your witness counsel. Hargrove rose, adjusting his tie as he approached the witness stand. His cross-examination strategy focused on undermining Mercer's credibility by highlighting the leniency deal and suggesting the former CFO was the true architect of any financial irregularities. Mr. Mercer, you're testifying today under a cooperation agreement that reduces your potential prison sentence from 20 years to 3 years. Correct. Yes, in exchange for truthful testimony. Quite a motivation to give the prosecutors what they want, isn't it? Objection. Vega called out. Counsel is impugning the witness's motives without foundation. Judge Carter considered briefly, sustained Mr. Hargrove rephrase. Hargrove nodded and shifted approach. Mr. Mercer, as CFO, you were ultimately responsible for ensuring accurate financial reporting, were you not? Yes, but, and you signed off on every financial statement mentioned in your testimony, certifying their accuracy to the SEC and to investors. Correct. Under direction from Mr. Cole. Yes, so you knowingly submitted false statements under your own signature, and now you're blaming Mr. Cole to save yourself. Objection. Vega called again, argumentative and mischaracterizes the cooperation agreement. Sustained. Judge Carter ruled, Mr. Hargrove, please stick to questions rather than accusations. The cross-examination continued in this vein, with Hargrove attempting to shift responsibility to Mercer while suggesting his testimony was shaped by self-interest. Throughout, Judge Carter maintained strict control, ruling on objections with consistent application of evidentiary standards, sometimes favoring the defense, sometimes the prosecution. As the day's session neared its end, a subtle shift in the courtroom atmosphere became apparent. A security officer near the main entrance seemed unusually alert. Scanning the gallery with heightened attention, 2 additional marshals had quietly entered and positioned themselves near the jury box. Something was happening beyond the formal proceedings, though most attendees remained unaware. Judge Carter, however, had noticed. A small screen built into her bench had flashed a security alert visible only to her. She maintained her composed demeanor while processing the information. A credible threat had been received against the courthouse, specifically mentioning this trial. Without revealing the reason, she called for an early adjournment. We'll resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned for the day. As the gallery began to clear, she signaled to the lead marshal to approach the bench. Their brief, hushed conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion at the back of the courtroom. A loud crack echoed through the space. Unmistakably, a gunshot chaos erupted instantly. People dove for cover or rushed toward the exits. The marshals immediately surrounded Judge Carter, while others moved to secure Brandon Cole and the attorneys. Through the confusion, it was impossible to determine exactly what had happened or whether anyone had been hit. Everyone down. A marshal shouted, "Stay down and remain calm." Within moments, additional security personnel flooded the courtroom, securing the doors and beginning to assess the situation. Judge Carter, despite the marshal's protective formation around her, remained standing at the bench, her composure remarkable under the circumstances. Clear the courtroom in an orderly fashion, she instructed, her voice carrying authority that cut through the panic. Marshals will direct you to safety. As security personnel guided people toward the exits, checking each person, a disturbing detail emerged. No weapon had been found, no shooter identified, and no one appeared to be injured. The source of the gunshot remained a mystery, even as the courthouse was locked down and a full security sweep implemented. Brandon Cole was escorted to a secure holding area separated from the general evacuation. As marshals surrounded him in a small conference room, his usual confidence appeared shaken, though whether from genuine fear or calculation was difficult to determine. This is exactly what happens when you put incompetent people in charge of security, he muttered to Hargrove loud enough for the nearest marshal to overhear. A federal courthouse should be the safest place in the city. The implication was clear. He was connecting the security breach to Judge Carter's overall competence, continuing his narrative of her inadequacy even in this moment of crisis. What Cole didn't know was that the courthouse security system included audio recording in all common areas and holding rooms, a measure implemented after a previous security incident years earlier. His comments, dismissive of a black female judge during an active security threat, were being preserved as part of the incident documentation. In her chambers, now converted to a temporary security command center, Judge Carter was reviewing preliminary information with the head of courthouse security and 2 FBI agents who had responded to the incident. The shot appears to have come from the rear gallery near the east exit, the security chief explained. We've reviewed initial camera footage and identified several persons of interest, but no clear shooter yet. Was anyone injured? Judge Carter asked, her primary concern, the safety of everyone in her courtroom. No injuries reported. We're still accounting for all attendees. One of the FBI agents, Special Agent Lisa Wong, studied a tablet displaying security footage. Judge Carter, there's something unusual about this incident. The timing, the lack of a clear target, the missing weapon. It doesn't fit the profile of a typical courthouse shooting. What are you suggesting, Agent Wong? I'm not ready to draw conclusions yet, But we need to consider all possibilities, including that this might have been staged to disrupt proceedings or influence the trial. The suggestion hung in the air, serious but unconfirmed. Judge Carter absorbed it with the same measured consideration she brought to legal arguments in her courtroom. Follow the evidence where it leads, she instructed. In the meantime, I need to determine how to proceed with the trial. This incident cannot be allowed to derail justice. As security professionals continued their investigation, journalists outside the courthouse were already reporting on the shooting, with wildly varying accounts of what had transpired. Some outlets, particularly those that had been amplifying Cole's narrative about Judge Carter, were subtly connecting the security failure to her leadership, questioning whether she had adequate control of her courtroom. By evening, a new dimension of the story began to emerge on social media. Anonymous accounts began suggesting the incident had been staged or exaggerated to generate sympathy for the judge and prejudice against Cole. These conspiracy theories gained traction in certain online communities, creating yet another challenge to the integrity of the proceedings. What none of these commentators knew was that the investigation was rapidly uncovering the truth, a truth that would shock the courtroom and the public when court reconvened the following morning. The courthouse opened the next day under heightened security. Every person entering underwent enhanced screening. Armed officers were stationed throughout the building, and the usual crowd of spectators and reporters had been significantly reduced, with access limited to a pre-approved list. Inside courtroom 24B, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. Judge Carter took the bench precisely at 9 a.m., her demeanor as composed as ever. Despite the previous day's chaos, the jury had been sequestered overnight as a precaution, shielded from the media speculation about the incident. Before we resume testimony, Judge Carter began, I need to address yesterday's incident. Following a thorough investigation by courthouse security and the FBI, we have determined that what many perceived as a gunshot was actually a precisely timed detonation of a modified firecracker device designed to create panic without causing physical harm. A murmur ran through the reduced gallery. Brandon Cole, seated at the defense table with perfect posture, betrayed no reaction beyond a slight narrowing of his eyes. Judge Carter continued, more disturbing is that the device has been traced to an individual connected to a private security firm contracted by one of Mr. Cole's subsidiary companies. This revelation sent a shock wave through the courtroom. All eyes turned to Cole, whose composed facade finally cracked surprise and alarm, flashing across his face before he regained control. In light of this development, Judge Carter said, her voice steady, the prosecution has requested a hearing on potential witness tampering and obstruction of justice. We will address this matter before resuming with scheduled testimony. Richard Hargrove was immediately on his feet. Your Honor, my client had absolutely no knowledge of or involvement in this incident. We object in the strongest possible terms to any insinuation otherwise, and request time to prepare a response to these serious allegations. You'll have that opportunity, counsel, Judge Carter assured him. The hearing will take place tomorrow morning, giving both sides adequate time to prepare. For today, we will continue with Mr. Mercer's testimony as scheduled, with additional security measures in place. As Mercer retook the stand to continue his testimony, the dynamics in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Jurors who had been carefully watching the legal chess match now cast speculative glances toward Cole, clearly wondering about his possible connection to the security incident. During the lunch recess, an emergency meeting took place in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. Brandon Cole faced Richard Hargrove across the table, both men speaking in hushed but intense tones. "This is a setup," Cole insisted. "I had nothing to do with that firecracker or whatever it was. Someone's trying to frame me." Hargrove's expression was grave. "The evidence linking the individual to your company is concerning Brandon. If there's anything you haven't told me, any connection, any communication that might emerge, I need to know now to prepare our response." "There's nothing," Cole maintained. "I've never authorized anything like this. It must be someone acting independently, maybe trying to curry favor. You know how many people work for my companies? I can't control every one of them. The timing is extremely problematic," Hargrove noted. "It occurred precisely when Mercer's testimony was damaging our case, and just as the judge was beginning to allow more latitude in my cross-examination." Cole leaned forward, lowering his voice further. "What about using this to our advantage? Request a mistrial, argue that the jury has been prejudiced by these false allegations. That strategy would be profoundly misguided." Hargrove replied firmly, "Judge Carter is likely to view such a request as an attempt to benefit from potential misconduct connected to your own organization. It would only reinforce the prosecution's narrative that you believe yourself above the law." The attorney gathered his notes, his decision made. "Our only viable approach is to fully cooperate with the investigation, express appropriate outrage at anyone who would attempt to disrupt judicial proceedings, and maintain absolute focus on the legitimate legal defense against the original charges." Cole's expression darkened with displeasure, but he offered no further argument. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, events were unfolding beyond his ability to control or manipulate them. When court resumed that afternoon, the prosecution continued methodically building their case, presenting documentary evidence supporting Mercer's testimony about systematic financial manipulation. Throughout, Judge Carter maintained the same impartial management of proceedings that had characterized the trial from the beginning, giving no indication that the previous day's events had altered her approach to the case. This steadfast professionalism stood in stark contrast to the narrative that had been constructed about her in certain media outlets, the narrative suggesting she was emotionally driven out of her depth or biased against Cole. To objective observers in the courtroom, the disconnect between this characterization and her actual conduct was becoming increasingly obvious. As the day's session concluded, Judge Carter addressed the court once more. "In preparation for tomorrow's hearing on the security incident, I am issuing a gag order prohibiting all trial participants from making public statements about yesterday's events. The investigation is ongoing, and speculation could interfere with determining the full truth of what occurred." This order directly targeted Cole's PR strategy, cutting off his ability to shape public perception of the incident before facts were fully established. His jaw tightened visibly as he absorbed this latest check on his influence. Outside the courthouse, Elena Vega intercepted Richard Hargrove as he headed to his car. "Richard, a word." The defense attorney paused, professional courtesy overriding the adversarial nature of their current roles. "Elena, You should know that we've obtained warrant access to communications between Cole and the security firm linked to yesterday's incident. She informed him, if there's anything your client hasn't disclosed to you now, would be the time to address it before tomorrow's hearing. Hargrove's expression remained neutral, though concern flickered briefly in his eyes. I appreciate the professional courtesy, Elena. My client maintains he had no knowledge of or involvement in the incident. For his sake, I hope that's true. Vega replied, because if it isn't, the original charges will be the least of his concerns. As the prosecutors and defense attorneys prepared for the next day's crucial hearing, Judge Maya Carter remained in her chambers late into the evening, reviewing the preliminary findings of the investigation. The evidence connecting the incident to Cole's organization was substantial, but not yet conclusive regarding his personal involvement. What was becoming clear, however, was that the incident represented more than a disruption of court proceedings. It was an attack on the judicial system itself, an attempt to control outcomes through intimidation rather than legal argument. As a judge, Carter found this assault on judicial independence far more concerning than any personal disrespect Cole had shown her. Tomorrow's hearing would determine not just additional charges in this specific case, but would send a message about whether wealth and power could place anyone beyond accountability. The stakes had risen far beyond one billionaire's tax evasion and fraud. The next morning, Courtroom 24B was closed to the general public. Only essential personnel, the parties directly involved, and a small group of specifically authorized media representatives were permitted to attend the hearing on the security incident. The heightened restrictions reflected both security concerns and the sensitive nature of the evidence to be presented. Judge Carter called the hearing to order precisely on schedule, her black robe seeming to emphasize the gravity of the proceedings. This hearing will address potential witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and contempt of court relating to yesterday's security incident. Assistant U.S. Attorney Vega, you may proceed. Elena Vega approached the podium with a tablet and several folders containing printed documents. Your Honor, the investigation has uncovered disturbing evidence suggesting a coordinated attempt to disrupt these proceedings and influence their outcome through intimidation. She presented a methodical case, beginning with technical analysis of the device used to simulate a gunshot, then tracing its procurement through a private security contractor regularly employed by Cole Enterprises for special projects. Most damaging were communications between this contractor and Cole's personal chief of staff, discussing a need to change the narrative of the trial and create a security situation that would demonstrate the judge's inability to control her courtroom. While we do not yet have direct evidence of Mr. Cole's personal knowledge of this plan, Vega concluded these actions were undertaken by his direct employees using corporate resources for his benefit. At minimum, this represents a failure of oversight that enabled a serious attack on judicial proceedings. Richard Hargrove's response was equally measured but forceful. Your Honor, Mr. Cole emphatically denies any knowledge of or involvement in this inexcusable incident. Like the court, he was shocked and disturbed by these events. If employees of his organization were involved, they were acting without authorization and against his explicit policies regarding legal matters. The attorney's strategy was clear: create distance between Cole and the actions of his subordinates, while expressing appropriate outrage at the incident itself. It was a technically sound approach given the evidence presented. What neither attorney knew was that the FBI had made a breakthrough in their investigation overnight. As Hargrove concluded his initial response, Agent Lisa Wong entered the courtroom and approached Elena Vega, discreetly handing her a sealed envelope. After reviewing its contents, Vega requested permission to present new evidence. Your Honor, we have just received information that significantly changes the evidentiary picture. With the court's permission, I'd like to call Special Agent Wong to present these findings. Judge Carter nodded. You may proceed. Agent Wong took the stand and was sworn in. With clinical precision, she described how investigators had recovered deleted text messages from the personal phone of Cole's chief of security, including direct communications with Cole himself. In these messages, Wong testified Mr. Cole explicitly approved what was described as a courtroom demonstration designed to, quote, rattle the judge and create grounds for questioning her competence. While the messages don't specifically mention a simulated gunshot, they do reference creating a controlled security incident that would change the momentum of the trial. The courtroom fell absolutely silent as Wong displayed the recovered messages on the evidence screen. Brandon Cole's expression transformed from confident detachment to barely contained fury as he realized the extent of what had been uncovered. Hargrove immediately requested a brief recess to confer with his client, which Judge Carter granted. When proceedings resumed 15 minutes later, the defense attorney's demeanor had visibly shifted. Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, Mr. Cole wishes to address the court directly regarding these allegations. Judge Carter studied Cole carefully. You may proceed, Mr. Cole, but I advise you to consider your words carefully. Cole rose, straightening his custom suit jacket in a gesture that seemed more habitual than necessary. When he spoke, his voice carried the practiced conviction of a man accustomed to shaping reality through sheer force of personality. Your Honor, I acknowledge approving what was presented to me as a demonstration of courthouse security vulnerabilities, a professional assessment to be conducted with full coordination of security personnel. At no point did I authorize any action that would disrupt proceedings or create actual alarm. If my instructions were misinterpreted or deliberately exceeded by those carrying them out, that represents a serious failure but not criminal intent on my part. It was a masterful pivot, acknowledging the now undeniable evidence of his involvement while recasting his intentions as benign or even constructive. In boardrooms and media appearances, such skillful reframing had served him well for decades. Judge Carter's expression remained impassive as she considered his statement. Mr. Cole, are you suggesting that you authorized a security assessment to be conducted during active court proceedings without the knowledge or permission of this court or courthouse security officials? Cole hesitated, recognizing the trap in her precise framing of the question. I approved a review of procedures, Your Honor. The specific timing and implementation were left to my security team. A convenient delegation of responsibility. Judge Carter observed, Agent Wong, does the evidence support Mr. Cole's characterization of these communications? No, Your Honor. Wong replied firmly, the messages explicitly reference creating disruption during the former CFO's testimony to knock him off stride and create a distraction when things are going badly. There is no mention of security assessment or coordination with official personnel. Judge Carter turned back to Cole. Mr. Cole, beyond the obvious contempt for this court demonstrated by these actions, what concerns me most is your apparent belief that the rules of society, including the sanctity of judicial proceedings, don't apply to you. This courtroom is not a corporate takeover where disruption and intimidation are tactical options. It is a forum for justice, where evidence and law determine outcomes, not wealth or power. She paused, allowing her words to resonate through the silent courtroom before continuing. Based on the evidence presented, I find probable cause to believe you have committed witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and criminal contempt of court. I am referring these matters to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution as separate charges from your current case. Additionally, I am revoking your bail effective immediately. Cole's face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. My attorneys will... Mr. Cole, Judge Carter interrupted, her voice remaining measured but firm. I advise you not to compound your difficulties with further contemptuous behavior. Marshals, please take the defendant into custody. As the marshals approached, Cole seemed to consider resistance for a brief moment before the reality of his situation became apparent. The carefully constructed shield of wealth and privilege that had protected him throughout his life had finally encountered a force it could not deflect or overcome, the law administered by someone immune to his influence and intimidation. Richard Hargrove, recognizing the gravity of the moment, quickly intervened. Your Honor, given these extraordinary developments, the defense requests a continuance to reassess our position regarding both the original charges and these new allegations. The trial will resume on Monday morning. Judge Carter ruled. That gives the defense 2 days to consider its position. In the meantime, Mr. Cole will remain in federal custody. As Cole was led from the courtroom, the implications of what had just transpired rippled through the legal community and beyond. A billionaire who had openly disrespected a federal judge, then allegedly orchestrated disruption of court proceedings, was being held accountable in real time regardless of his wealth and connections. Outside the courthouse, media coverage split along predictable lines. Some outlets portrayed Cole as a victim of judicial overreach, while others celebrated the rare sight of a powerful figure facing genuine consequences for attempting to manipulate the justice system. Social media exploded with commentary, much of it reflecting the deep class and racial divisions in American society. What few of these commentators recognized was that Judge Maya Carter had done nothing extraordinary. She had simply applied the law as written without fear or favor, exactly as her oath of office required. The fact that this seemed remarkable to many revealed more about the state of justice in America than about her specific actions. Over the weekend, while Cole adjusted to the stark reality of a federal holding cell, his legal and PR teams worked frantically to control the damage. Richard Hargrove, recognizing that his client's position had become untenable, engaged in preliminary discussions with prosecutors about a potential plea agreement, covering both the original financial crimes and the new obstruction charges. By Monday morning, a deal had been reached. When court convened, Brandon Cole appeared a changed man. The designer suit had been replaced by standard-issue prison attire, and his normally impeccable appearance showed signs of strain from 3 nights in detention. Your Honor, Hargrove addressed the court. After careful consideration, My client wishes to change his plea on all counts of the original indictment to guilty. Additionally, he has agreed to plead guilty to one count of obstruction of justice regarding the courtroom incident. The terms of the plea agreement were substantial. Cole would serve 7 years in federal prison, pay $500 million in fines and restitution, and be barred from serving as an officer or director of any public company for life. His empire would not collapse. It was too vast and too diversified for that. But his personal freedom and power would be severely curtailed. As the agreement was formally presented, Judge Carter reviewed each provision carefully, ensuring the punishment fit not just the crimes charged, but the broader pattern of behavior Cole had exhibited. "Mr. Cole, before I accept this plea, I need to ensure you understand its implications," she said. "Following standard procedure for all defendants regardless of their status, you are waiving your right to trial on these charges and accepting the penalties outlined in this agreement. Do you understand this?" Cole, subdued but still carrying himself with the remnants of his former arrogance, nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "And are you entering this plea voluntarily without coercion?" "Yes." "Then I accept your guilty plea and the terms of this agreement," Judge Carter declared. "Sentencing will be scheduled for 3 weeks from today, following the preparation of a pre-sentencing report." As the proceedings concluded, Judge Carter addressed one final matter. "Mr. Cole, when you first appeared in my courtroom, you refused to stand as a sign of respect, not for me personally, but for the justice system this court represents. Today, the justice system has spoken. It has treated you as it would any defendant, neither with extra harshness due to your wealth, nor with leniency because of your status. That equal application of the law, regardless of who stands before the court, is the true strength of our system." With that, she adjourned the court, closing a case that would be discussed in law schools and boardrooms for years to come. In the weeks that followed, analysis of the case revealed dimensions beyond the specific charges against Cole. His coordinated media campaign to undermine Judge Carter became a case study in how wealth and power attempt to shape justice through extrajudicial means. The racial and gender undertones of his attacks on her qualifications sparked important conversations about who is presumed competent in positions of authority and who must constantly prove their worth. Judge Maya Carter continued her judicial career without seeking publicity or commenting on the case, letting her work speak for itself. Her handling of the Cole trial earned her respect from legal professionals across the political spectrum, not because she had done anything unusual, but because she had remained steadfastly committed to applying the law equally in the face of extraordinary pressure and attempts at manipulation. 3 weeks later, at Cole's sentencing hearing, the courtroom was markedly different from the first day of trial. The arrogant billionaire who had once refused to stand for the judge now rose immediately. When she entered, his earlier contempt had been replaced by the grudging respect of someone who had finally encountered an immovable object in his path. Judge Carter delivered a sentencing statement that acknowledged both the severity of Cole's crimes and the possibility of redemption. "Mr. Cole, your actions caused real harm to investors, taxpayers, and the integrity of our financial markets. More troublingly, your attempt to disrupt these proceedings demonstrated a fundamental disrespect for the rule of law that undergirds our society." She continued, "However, our justice system is not merely punitive, but also rehabilitative. The years ahead offer you an opportunity for reflection and growth. a chance to re-examine the values that led you to place yourself above the laws that govern us all. As Cole was led away to begin serving his sentence, Judge Carter turned her attention to the next case on her docket, treating it with the same careful consideration she applied to all matters before her court, whether they involved billionaires or ordinary citizens facing minor charges. 6 months later, a small news item appeared noting that Brandon Cole had begun teaching business classes to fellow inmates at the Federal Correctional Institution where he was serving his sentence. Whether this represented genuine change or simply another strategy for maintaining status and control remained to be seen. What was clear, however, was that his encounter with Judge Maya Carter had forced him to confront, perhaps for the first time, the reality that even extraordinary wealth has limits when it collides with a justice system functioning as intended. Judge Carter's chambers received occasional updates on the case's aftermath, including the successful distribution of restitution funds to defrauded investors and the implementation of new compliance measures at Cole Enterprises under its restructured leadership. She kept no mementos of the high-profile case, no news clippings or legal journal articles analyzing her handling of the proceedings. The only acknowledgement of its significance in her office was a small framed quote from Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall that she had placed on her desk after the trial concluded, "In recognizing the humanity of our fellow beings, we pay ourselves the highest tribute." It was a reminder that true justice sees neither the richest defendant nor the poorest as anything other than equal before the law, a principle she had upheld in the face of extraordinary pressure. In doing so, Judge Maya Carter had not only prevailed in a battle of wills with a powerful man unaccustomed to limits, but had demonstrated the enduring strength of a system that, when functioning as designed, remains humanity's best attempt at ensuring no individual stands above accountability. The courtroom, where the drama had unfolded, returned to its normal rhythm of daily cases. The confrontation between the arrogant billionaire and the steadfast judge already fading into legal history, but its impact lingered in subtle ways, in how other wealthy defendants behaved in federal courtrooms, in conversations about judicial independence, and in the quiet inspiration Judge Carter provided to young law students who saw in her an example of integrity unmoved by power, prejudice, or pressure. And perhaps, though he would never publicly admit it even in Brandon Cole himself, who, for the first time in his adult life, had encountered something his money couldn't buy. His power couldn't intimidate, and his privilege couldn't overcome justice administered by a woman who refused to be anything less than its perfect embodiment